Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on the Transportation Improvement Program and Statewide Transportation Improvement Program process, also known as the STIP process. My name is Michelle Martin, and I am the Director of Planning in the Maryland Department of Transportation's Office of Planning, Programming, and Project Delivery, and we are very glad to have you with us today. Before we dive into the STIP process, I'd like to go over a few important details about our GoToWebinar platform and how this session will run. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted within the next few days. You will be able to find the recording on the MDOT YouTube channel, as well as the MDOT Regional Planning and MDOT Grant web pages. Please note that everyone was muted when you join the webinar, and we kindly ask that you remain muted during the presentation to ensure good audio quality for everyone. We will not be answering questions during the presentation. However, we will answer questions at the end, and we encourage you to type your questions in the question chat box as you think of them. Additionally, we will have a question and answer portion opportunity for you to raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question directly. Before we begin, I want to highlight that MDOT has a grants webpage and newsletter, which offer great resources for keeping up with the latest grant opportunities, applications, awards, upcoming webinars, and other resources. We will share more details about how you can sign up for the newsletter in a little bit. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Carrie Snyder, MDOT's Regional Planner. Carrie will be giving us an in-depth overview of the STIP process, including how to get awarded federal funds programmed. And we're excited to have her share her expertise with us today. I will now turn it over to Carrie. Thank you, Carrie.
Thanks, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the STIP Overview Process webinar. Like Michelle said, my name is Carrie Snyder. I'm the Regional Planner for the Washington region at MDOT in the Secretary's Office. I want to thank the MDOT Grants team for organizing this webinar where we'll be discussing the steps involved in the TIP and STIP to help you and MDOT's other local partners use and program federal funding. So you and your team have been putting together an amazing grant application for a project that's going to use federal funding that you haven't had access to before and meet your local transportation needs. You've done the work, you've secured the local match, and you're ready to start either billing or advertising your project. And just when you really get going, somebody in a state or federal aid office asks if your project is in the TIP or the STIP, because if it's not, you can't move forward. And then you spend anywhere from 1 to 2 months being tossed around the proverbial carousel of MPO and state government contacts until you finally, hopefully, reach either myself or another regional planner at the Secretary's Office. So we're hosting this webinar to familiarize both new grant awardees and local government staff on the practical steps in programming federal funding in the required documents. Due to the passage of the IIJA, more federal discretionary grants have been made available to local governments. So during this webinar, we're going to lay out all the details about what's required for a TIP amendment at the MPOs and a STIP amendment at MDOT. We'll get into those specifics later in the presentation, as well as who you need to coordinate with at MDOT and the metropolitan planning organizations. But before that starts, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to do a few live polling questions to get a better sense of the participants today.
All right, thanks, Carrie. All right, so the first poll I'm going to bring up is this one. So hopefully everyone should see, it says quick poll. Who do you represent? So if you could select one that works best for you, either city, county, local government, state government, federal government, an MPO, or private company or interested citizen. And I'll just give it a few moments to make sure we get everybody's vote in here. Okay, it looks like it's a pretty close tie here. We've got 30% for the city, county, local government and 31% for state government. So it's about a tie there. Then followed up with 20% MPO, about 18% private company or interested citizen, and 3% federal government. I'm going to move on to the second one here. This is going to be just a yes/no poll. So we'd like to know, before we get into the meat of today's webinar, are you familiar with the TIP-STIP process? Just a quick yes, no. I know there's probably a variable range that folks have familiarity with, but if you could pick whichever one fits you best for now. And it looks like it's about a 60-40 split, where we've got a close to 60% yes and a close to 40% no. So hopefully today's webinar will help increase that number. Close that one. We'll move to the third one. This is gonna be our last one before we keep moving on. And this is also a yes/no question. Have you requested a TIP-STIP amendment in the past? So that would be a yes or no answer. And that one is looking to be, folks are still voting, but it's a pretty close 30-70 split, where we've got the 30% yes and 70% no. I'm going to close that poll. And Carrie, if you want to move on with the presentation, I think we're good to go.
Great, thanks, Jen. Just to give you all a picture of the structure of MDOT, I'm in the Secretary's office, in the Office of Regional Planning, and the other offices that you could be working with potentially to implement your projects are the Maryland State Highway Administration, with the Regional and Intermodal Planning Division, Maryland Transit Administration, with the Capital Programming and Asset Management, Maryland Aviation Administration, Motor Vehicle Administration, and Port Administration are all under the MDOT umbrella as well, but very few local projects are coordinated there. And then tangentially, the MDTA, the Transportation Authority, and WMATA, or the Washington Metropolitan Transit Administration, are also connected with / funded by portions of our budget. MDOT's roles and responsibilities in the TIP-STIP process. So our regional planning team ensures that state, local, regional, and federal agencies work collaboratively on transportation planning and programming of projects, programs, and policies that use federal funding. We work closely with both urban and rural areas, including participation with federally required metropolitan planning organizations, rural regional entities, and local jurisdictions. The team also compiles the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, or the STIP, which ensures our access to federal dollars. So MDOT's regional planning team is myself, Dan Janicek, and our newest planner, Sean Kiernan. For those of you who might not be aware of MDOT's funding structure, all the funds that we receive through gas tax revenue, titling tax, fees, etc., get spent in a descending order of debt service, and then on operating expenses, and then finally our capital programming, including highway user revenues and WMATA. Additional things that support our capital program are bond sales, other small capital funds, and what we're here to talk to you about today, which is federal aid. Federal funds are used throughout most of MDOT's modal administrations, which we'll get into in the next few slides. And later, I'll explain how these federal funds need to be accounted for in both the TIP and the STIP documents. The IIJA provided a significant increase in federal funding for formula and discretionary grants for transit, highways, airports, ports, rail, freight, and active transportation in both rural and urban areas. Many of these grant programs are annual over the 5 years covered by IIJA and focus on the following priority areas: repairing and rebuilding infrastructure, climate change mitigation, resilience, equity, and safety. And to best leverage our state transportation dollars, MDOT continues to pursue relevant federal discretionary grants to maximize federal transportation funding opportunities. This increase has also led to opportunities for local governments to get access to more federal funding. And some of the grant opportunities that you either might be familiar with or actively applying to are listed here, like Safe Streets and Roads for All, Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity, RAISE grants, the newer ones, Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation, PROTECT, Charging and Fueling Infrastructure, CFI, LONO and bus facility grants, reconnecting communities, and bridge investment programs. So a few slides ago, I mentioned MPOs, or Metropolitan Planning Organizations. That's a term that the average person might not be familiar with, and so I just wanted to make sure that we all understood what an MPO is and what it's not. Federal legislation passed in the early 70s required the formation of an MPO for any urbanized area with a population greater than 50,000. And this MPO is a federally mandated and federally funded transportation policy making organization. It's made up of representatives from local governments and government transportation authorities, as well as some elected officials. MPOs are responsible for promoting an integrated approach to regional transportation planning, organizing, overseeing, developing, managing, and adopting various plans and programs, such as the long-range transportation plans and the short-term transportation improvement program, the TIP, and unified planning work programs, which is like the budgets. They are also responsible for planning, programming, and coordinating federal highway, transit, and other investments. So there are 6 MPOs in Maryland, 4 of which involve other states. There used to be one in Western Maryland, the Cumberland Area MPO. However, that one fell below the 50,000 population threshold after the 2020 census and has officially been disbanded. So from the west to east, we have the Hagerstown Eastern Panhandle MPO in blue, which covers Washington County, Maryland, and is shared with West Virginia. Then we have the National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board, or TPB, in red, which includes Frederick, Montgomery, Prince George's, and Charles counties, as well as the District of Columbia and the Northern Virginia counties. In yellow, we have the Baltimore Regional Transportation Planning Board, or the BRTB, which includes Carroll, Baltimore County, the City of Baltimore, Hartford, Anne Arundel, Howard, and most recently added Queen Anne's County. In tan, we have the Wilmington Area Planning Council, or WILMAPCO, which includes Cecil County, as well as parts of Delaware. And on the lower eastern shore, we have the Salisbury-Wicomico MPO, also shared with Delaware. And then finally, in southern Maryland, we have the Calvert-St. Mary's MPO in green. And the areas that have no color are rural areas that don't fall under an MPO planning area. You may have colloquially heard the terms MWCOG or WashCOG or BMC, but there's a difference between a council of governments, or a COG, and a metropolitan planning organization, of an MPO. A COG is a regional body that provides a forum for collaboration and decision-making, while an MPO is a governmental entity that plans and implements federal transportation funds. That responsibility for the federal funds is central to your goals of programming your federal dollars. So what is a TIP? A TIP is a short-term program of upcoming transportation projects that have available and committed federal funding with state and local match that MPOs update every 1 to 4 years. The TIP includes capital and non-capital surface transportation projects, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and other transportation enhancements, federal lands highway projects, and safety projects. The TIP is a multimodal list of projects that range from regionally significant mega projects to local bridge replacements. The TIP must also meet federal air quality conformity standards set by the Environmental Protection Agency in non-attainment areas. The current 6 MPO TIPs can be found on MDOT's regional planning homepage. As you can see, there's a screenshot from our website, and there's a drop-down list that lists out and links to all of those MPO's websites where you can locate the TIPs. This webinar recording, sample documents, and resources to help through this process will also be posted on this STIP section of the MDOT website. The MPO TIP update schedule. So the MPOs update their TIPs, like I said, every 1 to 4 years. And in that process, state transportation, transit, and local government agencies submit their locally approved projects for inclusion. MPO boards approve these TIPs and their long-range plans and submit them to USDOT for approval. If projects are changed significantly in scope or cost between these major updates, the TIP can be amended or administratively modified, as it's a dynamic programming document. And before we get into the minutia of TIP amendments and administrative modifications, let's first go into the second part of this process, which is the STIP in the TIP-STIP process. So the STIP is a list of transportation projects requesting funding that includes proposed federal, state, and local money for highway, transit, bicycle, and pedestrian projects throughout the state during the next 4 years. The STIP includes each MPO's approved TIP and other locally, regionally significant projects from non-MPO areas. And that funding will go towards maintaining, operating, and expanding the transportation system. Many of you might be familiar with our CTP, or our Consolidated Transportation Program. That is our 6-year budget document that annually goes before the legislature for approval and signature by the governor. The CTP includes all projects from all of our modal administrations across Maryland under MDOT's umbrella. And for a long time, we said that everything in the STIP could be found in the CTP, but that everything in the CTP was not going to be in the STIP, because the STIP focused mainly on federally funded projects. However, that recently has changed because of the advent of federal discretionary grant funding, especially to localities. The STIP must also be consistent with long-range transportation plans, like our MTP, the constrained long-range plans at the MPOs, as well as their TIPs, and it is required for projects to be eligible for federal funding. Our most recently approved STIP is the fiscal year 22 to 25 STIP, which was approved in November of 2021. MDOT is currently updating the new STIP, which will be posted early next year, and that document will cover fiscal years 25 to 28. Between major updates to the STIP, regional planners at MDOT process changes to it, which must either be approved by the MPO first or coordinated by MDOT's modal administrations if they're located in a non-metropolitan planning area. Amendments and administrative modifications are tracked on the regional planning homepage and listed there specifically for your benefit and for our federal partners or other people that are interested whether or not a project is in the TIP or STIP. The process is governed by the STIP procedures document, which determines what project changes warrant an amendment versus an administrative modification. And this document is signed by MDOT as well as administrators from FHWA and FTA at USDOT. We're going to go through all the details of this document before moving on to the process and steps of making these changes. There are 3 types of changes to projects in our procedures document: technical corrections, administrative modifications, and amendments. And these changes escalate in levels of review and approval. So for technical corrections, these are minor and don't require federal or MPO approval. And it's things like grammatical, syntax, typos, basically anything that includes like changes to nothing that touches the scope or the funding. So it could also change a project lead agency or project sponsor. And the procedures for this don't require federal or MPO approval and are handled on a notification basis to our MPO and federal partners. Since the TIP and the STIP are updated regularly, either through amendments or in their annual review and update process, technical corrections like these are either folded into those changes or they just go into the regular process. Administrative modifications can only happen to projects that are already in TIPs or STIPs, so new projects don't fall under this step. These are minor changes to a project, which could revise the project status information, justification, or scope, increase or decrease the funding amount in a phase, or shift funds from one year to another. It could change the program year of the funds, the source of the funds, or split or combine individually listed projects or group projects. These minor changes don't require federal approval. However, we coordinate heavily with our federal partners, and we provide the MPO with an administrative modification by email or letter. An MPO may elect not to process the TIP changes as an administrative modification, and as a result, those would be processed as an amendment. Each MPO approved administrative modification will be forwarded to MDOT for approval on behalf of the Secretary, which then we send to FHWA or FTA. And the MPO board may delegate approval of these administrative modifications to the MPO's executive director. And if they do, that MPO provides copies of that delegation to ourselves and our federal partners. So that delegation of authority to approve modifications is usually captured within the MPO's bylaws, and those can be found on their individual websites. The administrative modification, specifically changing the cost of the project, have different thresholds. So if the project is under $3 million, it can increase or decrease in cost up to 50% of the total. If it's between 3 and 10 million, it can increase or decrease in cost up to 30%. And if it's above $10 million, it can increase or decrease in cost up to 20%. So once approved by the MPO, the administrative modification is incorporated into the Maryland STIP and no federal action is required. Notification of it is made available to the public and posted on our website. MDOT forwards the administrative modifications to our federal partners for their records. However, they do reserve the right to disallow these modifications if it's inconsistent with the procedure. And then procedurally, FTA or FHWA sends a concurrence once they review and note that there are no issues. So for amendments, which are major changes to a project included in a long-range transportation plan, TIP or STIP, all of the new projects being added to the TIP or STIP are going to go through this amendment process first. So this is a project change that affects financial constraint, air quality conformity, adds or deletes a project or a phase, increases or decreasing an existing project phase, or involves a major change in the scope of work. These major changes do require federal approval. Amendments to the STIP must be developed in accordance with the provisions under our authorizing legislation, which are found here on this slide. Each approved MPO TIP amendment is forwarded to MDOT from the MPO. MDOT prepares a STIP amendment letter and attaches the TIP amendment to forward to FHWA and FTA for federal approval. And then once it is approved by FHWA and FTA, the amendment is incorporated into our STIP. And that letter with copies to SHA or MTA and any applicable MTOs is sent to and addressed to MDOT and then posted to our website on our tracking page. So this slide kind of covers the different administrative modification and amendment processes. There are two separate processes if a project falls within an MPO region or a rural area. So for the MPO region, you've won a federal grant. So you're going to be writing a letter to the MPO with the project phase and funding information, amending that new project into the MPO's TIP, filling out a STIP report, which will show the net federal funding on that project. Then the project gets amended into MDOT STIP, which MDOT sends the STIP amendment to FHWA and FTA, and we receive back that approval and post to our website. Now for the rural areas, which cover Garrett, Allegheny, Kent, Caroline, Talbot, Dorchester, Somerset, and Worcester counties, that is somewhat simpler because it does not include the MPO process in this, but the same thing applies on the STIP side, which is that you win a federal grant, you write MDOT instead of the MPO, a letter with the project phase and funding information, which we'll get into more of those details a little bit later, requesting that the project be amended into MDOT STIP. The same process for the STIP report that shows the net federal funding would be required. And then MDOT sends this STIP amendment to FHWA and MTA or FTA, and then they send back their approval and it gets posted to the website. Now, winning a federal grant certainly starts the process for some of you, but it may be a long period of time between the award announcements and the development of a grant agreement, which would require this TIP-STIP process to start. So 2 documents need to be filled out by the project sponsor, and that is the MPO TIP amendment letter that is drafted by you guys and or by your project sponsors and sent to the MPO. And then after the MPO's approval of that TIP amendment, a STIP spreadsheet is filled out that shows the budget document, that shows like the budget information for the fiscal years. And then that all is incorporated into a final amendment request package that gets posted on our website. And that includes the MDOT STIP letter drafted by myself, the STIP spreadsheet showing that net federal funding change, the MPO board approval or resolution of the MPO project funding included in their TIP, as well as the project sponsor TIP amendment letter. So in the next few slides, we'll be talking about the specifics for this process, and it's not as complicated as it seems. And as always, MDOT staff is here and available to meet and provide help through the process. So this is an example letter that localities would send to the MPO first, requesting an amendment to the TIP. This information included in the letter is listed on the side and also highlighted in yellow. It will be specific to which MPO your project is located in, as well as what their current TIP is in fiscal years. For example, the current TIP, the current TPB's TIP is fiscal year 23 to 26. You'll want to include the project sponsor, title, description, justification, as well as the funding sources, both federal and local match, and the cost estimate for the years of the TIP and beyond if necessary. If your project increases highway or transit capacity, you'll want to coordinate that with the MPO and include whether or not it does in your letter. And then make sure to explicitly request the approval for your TIP amendment and request that the MPO forward to MDOT for inclusion in our STIP. And then lastly, include your contact information and any attachments like, local budget tables that you might have for the project. This is a color-coded instruction sheet, but a blank version of this form as well as the letter will be available on our website in those resources areas. So I'm just going to kind of go through what's laid out here. The yellow areas denote information that the project sponsor must fill out. That is the project, including the project title and description, justification, the amendment criteria, which indicates whether it's a new project or if it's an increase or decrease of an existing project. The conformity status relates to air quality and projects that either increase or decrease capacity, like widening a road, widening a bridge, or taking like a lane of traffic away, for example. The environmental status relates to where it is in the NEPA process, which stands for National Environmental Policy Act. And examples of that, of what could be filled out in that field, are like a categorical exclusion, environmental impact statement, environmental assessment. And if it's too early on in the process, you could always, or if it doesn't relate to it, you could always put NA. On the left-hand side, in yellow, the phase detail and the funding categories should be filled out by the project sponsor as well. And I've included a couple of abbreviations of the types of funding that we would see from these grant projects. So like EMRK stands for an earmark fund. HBRRP is the Bridge Rehabilitation Program. CFI, charging and fueling infrastructure, NEVI, which is the electrical vehicle one, and CRP, which is the carbon reduction program. The sections highlighted in blue are the project funding levels before any change is made to the cost. If it's a new project, this section will obviously be left blank. And then the green section will also be filled out by the project sponsor, and this denotes new funding to the TIP and STIP. As you can see, there are two sections for each fiscal year, indicating whether it is a federal or a match funding. And these proposed numbers must match the TIP report that is generated by the MPO. So new funding information is also included on the bottom sections, or previous and balance to complete funding. So because the STIP is fiscal years 22 to 25, sometimes there's funding that falls outside those timeframes. So if there was funding spent on the project, federal funding especially, you'll want to put that on the bottom left-hand corner in prior cost. And then balance to complete is project funding that is going to occur after the years of the STIP, which is 26 and beyond. Finally, the sections highlighted in red are cells that have funding formula in them that auto-calculate the changes, whether that be totals, like at the bottom of line of the blue sections and green sections, or the change section in the bottom third of the spreadsheet. Those calculate the difference between the current and proposed actions. And then circled in red up at top is the net federal funding change, which is what the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration are most concerned with, and the number that they're actually approving. And then just a quick note, the sections in red have formulas in them in the documents that we're going to be posting for you guys for your use. You do not want to touch the red sections because they have formulas that will help auto calculate all of this information for you. So now that you know generally what is involved in an amendment, an administrative modification to the TIP or STIP, here is who you contact at the MPOs to start the process. While there are sometimes many more people that work at these MPOs, these are the executive personnel that will be able to lead you to the right staff person at the MPO to implement these changes to the TIP. All right, so for these TIP, STIP resources, you'll be able to find them at this website, mdot.maryland.gov/STIP. And the things that we're going to be including there are the draft TIP amendment letter example, the STIP report instruction form, as well as a blank STIP report, the recording of this webinar and the presentation, which will be a YouTube link. And then afterwards, we're going to be developing an FAQ sheet, which will be a PDF. I also wanted to mention the MDOT grant resources that are available on the IIJA grants section of our website. That includes federal discretionary grant openings, MDOT letter of support request forms, factors for success, state and local award highlights, links to grant funding opportunities and program details, other recorded webinars they've given before, as well as an option to sign up for the MDOT federal discretionary grant newsletters, which will give you information across the board on all of these different available discretionary grants that you could apply for. And then here's my contact information, as well as the other regional planners at MDOT in the Secretary's office that I mentioned, Dan Janicek and Sean Kiernan, as well as the areas that we cover. And there's also a general email for regional planning that you could include as well. All right, and now I'm going to turn it over to Jen to conduct a few more polling questions. Take it away, Jen.
All right, thank you, Carrie. Yep, so we've got 2 more polling questions, and then we'll move to Q&A. So just to kind of round out the webinar, now that you know what the TIP-STIP amendment is needed for and how you would go about it, curious of the folks on the line, do you anticipate the need for a TIP-STIP amendment? And if you do, would it be immediately, in the next month, in the next 6 months, in the next year, or maybe sometime in the future? And Carrie, it looks like some folks might be reaching out to you or submitting things there. It says we've got about 6% immediately,
Wonderful.
9% in the next month, 12% in the next 6 months, 11% in the next year, and 60. So the majority, 60%, sometime in the future. But the other 40% is within the next year, with 20% either immediately or in the next month. So that's great to hear, and sounds like some folks might be reaching out. I'm gonna close that one. And the last polling question is a yes or no. Do you have a better understanding of the TIP-STIP process after today's webinar? We hope that you select yes, but if you select no, that does give us a feel for, maybe we need some clarification. And actually, that's a good point. If you do select no, which it looks like there are a couple of votes for no, is 93% yes, 7% no at the moment. If that's something you could put in your question, and we can talk about it during the question and answer session, or you can certainly reach out directly to Carrie, Dan, or Sean, and get your question asked or clarification there. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. So Carrie, I guess, yep, we'll just keep it on this slide for now. And so I'll say I don't see any questions in the question or chat box, but at this time, you could either put a question in that box, or if you raise your hand, I should be able to see that your hand is raised. I'm not seeing anybody at the moment. Let's see, I do see one question here. Carrie, maybe you can answer this one. How long does the process take?
So it differs from MPO to MPO. So for example, the Baltimore Regional Transportation Planning Board, they have a month-to-month basis, as well as the TPB region. And some MPOs meet quarterly, and some MPOs meet on an as-needed or as-requested basis. So it differs. If it is a change that is located in a rural area, that's going to be a bit of a faster process because it's only going through MDOT. But if it's a project located in an MPO region, it could take anywhere from 1 to 3 months, depending on if there's an established meeting that the MPO is already planning on having where they approve these TIP amendments, or if it is a meeting that needs to be requested.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
Thanks.
Again, if you have a question, go ahead. Oh, okay, let's see. I see one in the question box here. When in the project planning process should I coordinate with someone about a TIP amendment, and who should I start with?
So I would definitely start, it depends on if it is a highway or a transit project, but definitely start with the regional planners at MDOT TSO. If there are existing meetings at the local county level, sometimes, like I know, like Frederick County, for example, their City of Frederick and Frederick County staff meet on a quarterly basis with SHA staff. And I know that Montgomery County and Prince George's, they have similar type meetings where they meet regularly to go over active projects and programs going on at the local level with transportation planning staff at SHA. And so it depends on if it's an existing project, but if you don't know where to start, please do reach out to me and Dan and Sean at MDOT in the Secretary's office.
Okay, and I'm not sure if attendees can see everything that I'm seeing. There was from the MDOT team, just a clarification on that, Carrie. Looks like it says, but if your project is not planning to utilize federal funds, you don't need to worry too much about the TIP STIP. Maybe you could clarify that a little bit.
Correct. I mean, if it's not using federal funding, and if it's not like a major regionally significant project that is, crossing state lines or on the interstate system, no, it would not need to be processed through a TIP or a STIP.
Thank you. And then there was one other note, just going back to, who do you start with? On the previous slide that you showed there, maybe if you want to go back and maybe just show your contact information slide, so folks see that while we're talking.
There we go.
It was recommended that if you're not sure who to start with, you could always reach out to that general email address too and ask for support. So that general email is the MDOT Regional Planning email address. Okay, here's another question. How are the TIP and STIP different than the CTP, and how are they similar?
Yeah, that's a great question. The CTP, like I mentioned, it's a 6-year budget document, and that covers all of our modal administrations across the state of Maryland and every project being funded with all sources of funding at MDOT. The TIP is a available and committed federal funding document at each of the MPOs. And our STIP includes all of the MPO's locally approved regional TIPs, as well as projects that have federal funding in rural areas. For example, there might be a bridge replacement in Garrett County, Western Maryland, that has federal bridge funds attached to it, and that would need to be included in the STIP, but it's not already included in an MPO's TIP because it doesn't fall into those planning areas. And so our CTP is longer in time frame than these budget documents, and also the TIPs, they vary based on fiscal year. So, and some MPOs approve their TIPs every year, some do every 2 years, some do it every 4 years. And so those fiscal years, while they might not always line up, everything that is included in them needs to also be reflected in our STIP, which right now currently is the 22 to 25. So the most recently approved CTP is from fiscal years 24 to 29. The draft is under review and is going to be submitted. The fiscal year 25 to 2030 CTP is currently being worked on at MDOT and is being submitted to the legislature in January for approval. And so that's updated annually as opposed to the TIP and STIPs, which are updated, it varies, but our STIP is updated every 3 years.
Okay. Now here's one. If your project is federally funded, but not infrastructure based, does the project need to go through the TIP-STIP process?
If it's transportation based, it would need to be. If it's a federal funding, Department of Education, it would not need to be.
Okay. Says we heard that the amendment process varies by MPO. Once amended by the MPO, how long does it take for MDOT to approve?
So MDOT is usually involved in the process, depending on the MPO. It's usually, at least we're coordinating on the process of amending local projects into an MPO's TIP, and it takes anywhere from like a week to 2 weeks to get a project that has been approved by the MPO submitted and filled out and sent to our federal partners at FHWA and FTA. And then they have their own review and approval process. And so they have to coordinate with their local regional planning offices and then get approval from their headquarters offices. So that additional review and approval could take 2 to 4 weeks. And if there are issues or questions or questions from FHWA or FTA staff, they'll send those back and coordinate with both MDOT and our local partners if it's a local project. And so those discrepancies or any changes that need to be made, that adds a little bit more time. But I think the process from MPO approval to federal approval could be anywhere from a month to 2 months.
Okay. Let's see. Already got that one. Do I need to coordinate a TIP amendment before I apply for a federal grant, or only if it's awarded?
I know that some agencies, if they think they're going to get the award, they coordinate it early, but I think it's safest to coordinate the TIP amendment for after you've secured and the award has been announced.
Okay, there's one here that's got a couple questions in one. I'm going to break it down. For grant applications, who are the best contacts at the MPOs for letters of support?
In the slide that I listed here, you can certainly contact any of these people listed in this MPO contacts sheet. They'll be able to get to the right person. The smaller MPOs that maybe only have 2 or 3 staff members, it will most likely be one of these people. Bigger MPOs like Baltimore or Washington, there's different people listed. They have more people that work there, anywhere from 20 to 40 or 50. And so it could be somebody else. But if you had a specific MPO that you wanted the exact person to contact, please send that in the chat and I'll get you the direct person.
And this is related to that letter of support. So should we ask the MPOs to include language about the TIP?
Yeah, depending on the federal grant, because I know that this was an issue when the congressionally directed earmark funding came up a couple years ago. There was a requirement to win an award that basically said your project must be in the TIP or STIP. And a lot of these projects hadn't had any federal funding connected to them already. And so the MPOs addressed letters of support for those projects that said, if awarded, the project would be included into the TIP and forwarded to MDOT for inclusion in the STIP. And so you can certainly request that, but I think that a lot of the MPOs who have been sending these letters over the past couple of years about earmark funding requests and letters of support, we've been all running into this same issue, but it certainly does not hurt to explicitly request that.
Okay, and let's see. If our federal award, the SS4A, I think that's Safe Streets for All, if I remember correctly,
Yep.
is only for the development of a safety action plan, not a construction process, do we need to do this process?
If it is federal dollars for a transportation project, if it's a plan or like a study or something that's not actually building something right now, there is the option of including that plan and that federal funding reflected in the MPO's UPWP or Unified Planning Work Program. They'll usually list out the studies that are being conducted in their planning areas and indicate whether they have federal funds attached to them. But I can also look into that one specifically and get that back to you. But I'm 90% sure, yes.
Okay, thank you. Can you clarify if all of the projects in the STIP are in the CTP?
So all of the MDOT projects in the STIP are in the CTP. However, like a Frederick County local bridge on a local road that is using federal funding, which is in the TPB's TIP, and then the MDOT STIP would not be in our CTP, our budget, because it's a local project with a local match to the federal fund, if that makes sense.
Can MDOT amend or veto projects in MPO's TIPs while developing the STIP?
I don't see why we would, but if you want to add any clarification on that one.
Okay, let's see. There was one other I was going to go back to. Let me check here. And thank you everyone for submitting the questions. This is helpful. I think it's helpful for everybody to hear what the questions are. I'm sure folks have similar questions. So Carrie, does MDOT have a say in the MPO TIPs?
Yes, we certainly submit our own MDOT projects into the TIPs for inclusion, and MDOT usually sits on the boards which approve these final documents. But if a local project is being submitted, that's their project, that's their concern, and it gets included if it has federal funding attached to it, or if it is a regionally significant project. I mean, if you want our say, we'll certainly offer it.
Okay, here's one. I'm going back to the letters of support here. Says, if we seek a letter from MDOT for a grant or earmark, will you provide STIP language for a local sponsor?
Yes, absolutely. Sean Winkler is the local grants and I didn't include his contact information, but it is available on the IIJA grants opportunities page. But he certainly has coordinated with many local governments applying for federal grant opportunities in the past and has helped with those letters of support and the drafts.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions in the question box. Hopefully I think I've read out everyone's question that has put one in the box, and I don't see any hands raised at the moment. Maybe we'll just give it a couple minutes. There's only about 5 more minutes left in the webinar, so maybe we'll just hang on here. And if anybody else has a question, just pop it in the box, or again, raise your hand and we'll get to it.
Yeah, these are great questions, guys. Thanks so much.
Okay, we have one more that just popped up. Besides MDOT and MPOs, are any other state agencies involved in the STIP amendment or development process?
I don't think so, other than MDOT and our modal administrations and the MPOs and local governments. There are some regional, like rural entities that are in the non-metropolitan planning areas. But not other like major statewide agencies.
Okay. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and call it a day. I want to thank everybody again for their attendance and all of the great questions. Again, we'll follow up with an email to the registrants and provide links to where the webinar recording will be, a copy of the presentation, and we'll have some FAQs for you as well. So thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, Jen. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
You too.